Kia ora koutou and welcome to eHealthTALK NZ. Today I'm joined by Cushla Smyth. She's the Chief Executive of the Medical Technology Association of New Zealand, and the first of a four-part collaborative series exploring issues and themes relevant to medical technology manufacturers, importers and distributors of medical devices in New Zealand. So welcome on the show, Cushla. Lovely to have you here. Can you start by telling our listeners a little about yourself and the role of MTANZ?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Rebecca. HiNZ and MTANZ have worked together very successfully over the years, so it's great to be doing this with you. As you said, my name is Cushla, and I guess where I always start is that I trained as a registered nurse a very long time ago, back when I was 17. And the reason I always start with that is because it's very easy to remember when you've had a clinical background that when you're working in health, any part of health, this is always about the patient, so it's easy to keep the patients in mind in any role that I've ever had. So I have worked in lots of different areas of health. Obviously, I've done some nursing. I worked for pharmaceutical companies in New Zealand and in Australia. I worked for hospital procurement for some time for medical devices. Then I moved on to the University of Auckland and worked in clinical research for a long time in medicines and also medical devices, and some digital projects as well. We did one of the first telemedicine projects while I was in that role. That was in 2010. Then I moved on to a warehousing and distribution for hospitals for medical devices. So yeah, I've actually worked in health for over 30 years. MTANZ itself, we are the trade association for medical device companies in New Zealand. As you know, Rebecca, but what other people might not know is that there is a pretty clear delineation between digital health and medical devices. So we are the medical device industry representation. We have about 100 members in New Zealand. A lot of those are multinational companies. Some of them are New Zealand companies, very large New Zealand companies such as Fisher & Paykel. But New Zealand also has a strong distributor representation as well. We import over 95% of medical devices that are used in New Zealand. So we do represent quite a few distributors as well.
Great. Well, yeah, we've known each other a long time. I didn't know all of that about your background, so really interesting. So on June 30th and July 1st of this year, MTANZ held its national conference in Auckland. I was lucky enough to attend. And you opened the proceedings and set the scene with the results of your recent member survey. So can you tell us why you decided to do the survey and what were its key findings?
We do a survey each year of our members, and generally that survey is more around, how our members feel like that we are performing, what types of activities that they would like us to be working on. Generally those are in market access, regulatory, government affairs and advocacy, but just to really check in with our members that we're focusing our resources in the right areas and that indeed they're happy with our performance. I'm someone that talks to the members a lot because it's always helpful to understand what is happening on the ground. And I had been talking to a lot of suppliers that were finding it more and more difficult to do business in New Zealand, finding the uncertainty difficult, and that was causing really low confidence in the market. And because I had had all of these discussions and everything was anecdotal, I thought it would be helpful at that stage to get some quantitative data in terms of how members were really feeling and what their confidence in the New Zealand market is right now. So instead of the normal survey, we did a business confidence survey.
And how did your members rate the overall ease of doing business in the New Zealand health system today? And was that impacted by the health sector reforms?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the health reforms. We'll remember back to when the health reforms were announced, and by combining those 20 entities into one, it was meant to make everything easier, right? You don't have to deal separately with 20 different entities. So the response to that survey was, on average, a 2 out of 5 was the score. So people are struggling in New Zealand to do business, and we'll go into that a little bit more around why. And then the follow-up question was, how would you compare that to doing business in New Zealand in 2009 in 2019? Where they were having to deal with multiple different entities, and 77% of the respondents said that they either find it more difficult or much more difficult to do business now compared to dealing with the 20 entities separately. So I guess that's the opposite of what the government was trying to achieve.
Certainly. So what were or are the main issues or challenges your members are encountering when trying to sell into the New Zealand market? And how did you look to address some of these at the conference?
Timeliness and transparency of procurement processes were two of the top rated issues. Procurement delays cited as a barrier by 85% of respondents, and the lack of transparency was about 72% of respondents said that this was an issue. Interestingly, when Pharmac was reviewed back in 2022 and the final report came out, that was one of the main findings of that report in terms of medical devices and also medicines as well. I think that the procurement processes lacked transparency and timeliness. So these are two things that members have been talking about for the last 3 years at least, and probably actually before that, and the independent review obviously also cited that as well. So those are not new problems. Around 80% of our respondents said that they find it difficult to introduce new technology into New Zealand as well, and that was a big barrier.
Must be disappointing to hear those things. You did have Associate Health Minister David Seymour as a keynote speaker at the conference, which was great. And he did tell attendees in June 2024 that the contracting for medical devices would either be all in or all out of Pharmac within a year to provide some more certainty and transparency. But said this year he hopes to have the decision made within the next month, but we'll see if that happens. Can you talk us through the question of which government agency is responsible for medical device procurement and the impact of not having a decision around this yet?
The impact is big. So 70% of the respondents in the survey said that the lack of clarity around which agency is leading medical device management is an issue. And it's an issue for a couple of reasons. There's just general confusion around who you need to deal with, which is obviously not very efficient. But on top of that, there's a lot of duplication between the agencies as well, around having to do the exact same exercise with one entity and then having to do it again, or reporting, or those types of things. And it's also creating quite a bit of uncertainty in the market as well. And I mean, we really thought it would be made this year. When Minister Seymour was at the conference last year, he promised that there would be a decision, and we do keep hearing different dates in which the decision will be made. So, in one forum, Minister Seymour said that it would be made by the end of this term, but that's September next year. In our forum, he said, potentially by the end of the year or maybe in a month. I think that we are a month on from the conference now, and I'm not sure that they are close to making that decision. For some background, in 2010, the government decided that Pharmac would have a part in medical device procurement, and then that was enacted in 2012. There has really been confusion since 2012 on who leads medical device management, which is really, that confusion and lack of clarity is only getting worse. And I think it also is we need to acknowledge that for those agencies, they have that uncertainty too. You've got these teams that are now feeling very uncertain. So, we're losing confidence in the market. You've got people in these teams that don't have the certainty around their roles. And I think the decision needs to be made very soon.
Yeah, the chair of Pharmac, Paula Bennett, spoke about that uncertainty for staff as well. So the question is essentially, will it sit with Health New Zealand Te Whatu or will it sit with Pharmac? The minister expressed his desire, I think, that he would prefer it sit with Pharmac, but do your members have a preference for where this role should sit, or they just want a decision? And if you can just talk through a little bit about how it works at the moment with Health New Zealand and Pharmac, because they sort of say they are working together currently. They're doing these health technology assessments and things, but clearly it's not as simple as process as it might appear.
No, I don't think it is as simple as it might appear, and effectively it's been set up that they're actually almost competing for this business at the moment, and I think that's a hard environment to really work collaboratively together in. So I think that in itself is difficult. In terms of how the members feel, I think individual members all have different ideas about this around who that they would like to do that. Mostly the members agree that they want one entity to work on it and it to be very, very clear what the scope of the responsibility is and who they need to be dealing with. So we don't have a definitive opinion on who we think should do it at this stage. We just really want a decision for one of them. Then we want the opportunity to work alongside that entity to ensure that the processes are fit for purpose, that they're efficient, that they're timely, that they're transparent, that there are published timelines for procurement processes, that we have the ability to be able to work with them on things that don't work. So no particular preference, but a decision needs to be made soon, and we want to be able to work with them on getting a really good fit for purpose system for procurement in New Zealand and for introducing new technology.
Given these frustrations for suppliers when it does come to the current processes, are companies still seeing New Zealand as a good market for launching new devices, investing in growth? Because obviously the future of health, we need technology to assist us.
Exactly right, and we need a thriving medical sector as well. I mean, the government is going for growth, right? That is one of their goals, whereas my practical experience of that is that, I've got companies that are saying that they're reevaluating the New Zealand and how attractive that it is because of all of the uncertainty. And we asked this specific question in the survey as well. We said, how confident are you that your business will grow? The average answer there was a 3 out of 5, so relatively neutral. And then the follow-up question was, how likely are you to invest in New Zealand, whether that be your infrastructure or headcount and any of those things in the next 3 years? And that the average answer was a 3 out of 5. So that to me suggests that they're feeling pretty neutral about growing, and also that they are pretty hesitant to invest capital. And just anecdotally, when I hear from members and if I ask them that question personally, would you invest $150,000 in New Zealand at the moment or in your Australian business? And most often the answer is Australia.
Mm. Yeah, it is often ANZ businesses, isn't it?
Yeah,
so,
that's right. Yeah.
Our loss is usually their gain. So at the conference, Catherine Epps from Pharmac did speak about how the organisation has significantly expanded its national device list. Can you just talk about what does that mean? What is it? What does it mean for suppliers and for hospitals when they're looking to buy medical technologies?
Yeah, ultimately this list is meant to be the comprehensive list that they will eventually put some controls around so that hospitals can only purchase off this list. I guess where we want to be very sure is that we can understand that you need controls for the hospitals and budgets, etc. People just can't go off, willy-nilly picking new products and spending money on them. But there does need to be a really robust and efficient way to be able to introduce new technology onto that list and indeed into the system itself. There is also a bit of confusion here as well, because through HiNZ, they have been developing a health system catalogue, which is also a national list of products as well. And so suppliers are having to provide information to Pharmac on the national comprehensive list. They're also having to provide that same information to HiNZ for the health system catalogue. Supposedly, again, they are working together on those things, but never to the extent that we don't have to provide just one set of information to an entity. It's always two separate lots of information. And then we also hear about, because the majority of hospitals now have the same ERP system through FPIM, now there is more nationally aggregated data as well, which is forming product lists as well. So it can be quite confusing, especially if you're coming from Australia and you don't know much about the market in New Zealand, your obligations for all of those lists, especially the health system catalogue and the comprehensive list.
Certainly sounds inefficient. So it sounds like the answer is going to be no, but does the list provide the kind of transparency and consistency the sector has been calling for? And Catherine also mentioned at the conference that Pharmac's no longer going to call it a closed list, which was in response to industry. Can you talk through that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the list is going to provide the consistency that we're after. I mean, that's more so around the procurement processes themselves as opposed to this static list. We are really happy that Pharmac took that feedback and used it, that it shouldn't be called a closed list. I mean, you and I both know that the evolution of medical technology happens very quickly, and often products are replaced by a product which has a small iterative improvement as opposed to a completely new product. So there was a real question around even just the admin side of it. How was that going to work? These products are constantly being updated. How are we going to ensure that that isn't just a static list and it is actually a living list and it is actually helpful for the hospitals themselves? But I mean, Catherine Epps herself, she always has an open door, and she was always very open to feedback, and we were really grateful that she took that on board.
So what were some of the other main themes that emerged from this year's conference? And were there any particular messages that really resonated with you or with the sector?
A lot of it was around what we have been discussing. So we heard presentations from Pharmac, we heard them from HiNZ and around a lot of these themes. We also heard from some of the private hospital groups, and that was very interesting. Oftentimes there are changes in health which will dramatically affect suppliers, but they aren't necessarily involved in those discussions. So with the outsourcing now from public to private, obviously all of those procedures would have been done in the hospital and our suppliers would be supplying that hospital. All of that demand is moving physically to a different place, and those suppliers will now need to go to a different place, obviously with different contractual arrangements and things. So they were fantastic. We also talked about the medical products bill and just regulatory in general, and we'll probably do that on the next podcast, I can imagine. So I won't go into that, but it was really helpful to get an update from the Ministry of Health Policy team and MedSafe on that. And then at the end of the second day, we often do a supplier-only session, and that session was focused around, hopefully the decision around who will lead medical device management will be made soon. When it is made, what are the main priorities that we as members have and need to advocate on in terms of the transition itself? There's often a lot of confusion around members having contracts with say Pharmac, that are then being worked on by HiNZ. And you can imagine when one entity does take over and you've got 20 years worth of contracts at Pharmac and, 20 years worth of contracts with the hospitals and HiNZ, just practical things around how that will work. What are our expectations around timelines? What are our expectations around having a seat at the table and actually being able to influence what's happening?
So based on those themes and your survey results, what areas or actions is MTANZ focusing on in 2025?
As I said, a lot of these messages are not new. So a big part of it is really getting some awareness that this is the way that companies are feeling at the moment, and that they really do need some clarity and some certainty. I mean, what we don't want is, companies leaving New Zealand. That's bad for the economy and it's bad for patients. So a lot of this is really around advocacy and ensuring that the decisions that need to be made are made, and then there is a successful transition. I guess just making sure that we are talking to the right people and that they are aware of the unintended consequences of what is happening in the market at the moment. I mean, obviously patients are the most important thing in the health system, but because the health system has been in turmoil, there is all of this other turmoil that is happening in the market, and we don't want that to be one of the unintended consequences, that all of a sudden we don't have a thriving medical technology sector, we don't have what patients need. And I think medicines is a cautionary tale. Someone like me would have been sitting here saying this about medicines probably 20 years ago, that pharmaceutical companies are losing confidence in this market. They will leave this market because it's not a big enough market to be attractive in terms of a return on investment, and then patients will have less access to medicine. So this is what we're saying, don't let that be the unintended consequence, that patients can no longer access technology just because we can't make a decision that's been due since 2012.
Just finally, what is your vision for the future of the medical technology sector in New Zealand, and what do you see as the role of MTANZ in achieving that?
If I'm really honest, I just want to get the basics right at the moment before it's too aspirational. We really need a decision on medical device management. We need to know whether we are going to have a regulatory system or not. We need to know that we can introduce new products in New Zealand and this can be a thriving market. So those are just the basics, right, before we get to that aspirational vision. But ultimately, as someone that has worked directly in health as a nurse, and as I've had family members that are sick recently, I really want patients to be able to have what they need when they need it in terms of medical technology. And if that is enabled, it will mean that we also have a thriving medical technology sector, which is also good for economic growth, which I think all of those things should be all of our goals. How we actually achieve that when there is so much inertia around decision making is the difficult question, is how do we achieve that?
Absolutely, yeah. You need those basic foundations, don't you, that you can then build upon. So let's hope that some of those building blocks start being put in place and we can look up and out and to a more exciting future. So thanks for joining me today, Cushla. It's been really insightful. As I said, we will be diving deeper into some of the topics we've touched on today in future episodes. So be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast to learn more. Mā te wā.